Welcome back to the shop, my friends. Steve here at SKS Props, and this is part 2 of my Aliens Colonial Marine chest armor build series. In this video, we're going to wrap up everything from part 1, which means I'm going to show you how to make custom straps and apply a killer paint job to this. Now, this camo was insane and it was very intense. It took me several days to lay everything out and apply it, but I will take photos of the front and the back and have those in the video so you can pause it to see exactly how I laid everything out. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to copy me exactly. It might just be a good starting place. And if you would like to make your own Aliens Colonial Marine chest armor, I of course have free PDF files available over on my website that you can download to build right along with me. And just like all the rest of my builds, this armor is made completely out of my HD foam, which you can find over at Blick Art Materials. Now, with this build, there are other things that I would like to add to it. I need to source the BDUs, which there are armor makers out there that make screen accurate versions. They're very expensive, so I'm trying to decide, do I go that route or do I find some that's close or good enough for cosplay? Also, there are other pieces that I want to add to this armor-wise, and I will do that later on, but at this point, I need to take a step away because I've been working on this chest piece for over a month, and taking a break and then coming back to a project is always a good idea. So, I want to show you what it takes to complete this chest armor. Let's go ahead and get started. With all the armor sections fabricated and the seams sealed, I can now coat the foam with 2 light coats of Plasti Dip. I did make sure to roll up any additional nylon webbing and covered the buckles. With the Plasti Dip cured, I can now apply a dusting of green Krylon Camouflage, which is an ultra matte flat. This spray paint was applied to all the armor and the buckles, but you don't want to apply it thick because it can crack. Now, sometimes Plasti Dip can reactivate contact cement, so in this case I went in with a little more filler on some of the seams. Just like before, this is applied with a tongue depressor and then smoothed out with my finger and a little bit of water. The nylon straps could once again be threaded through the parachute clips, and the whole chest piece could be reassembled. This is going to make it a lot easier to paint. For the armor, I'm going to start off with a wash of sap green, unbleached titanium, and Payne's gray. These are all Liquitex heavy body acrylics. Once mixed together, this wash is going to be applied to all the surfaces using a 1-inch mop brush. Now, what the wash is doing here, it isn't for coverage. More or less, it's filling the pores and creating a base layer for additional acrylics. For my camo, I decided to use some really cheap craft paints to plot everything out. And then I go back with the Liquitex heavy bodies once my design was finalized. To begin, I'm going to take some of this watered down paint and start to paint on some abstract shapes. And for this process, I'd probably recommend to go in the order of sand, brown, and then black. And it's because when I looked at the original armor, some colors overlap more than others. So this is going to be the start of the sand colors, and I am trying to match up the camo over the multiple armor pieces. I'm not drawing these shapes on with anything more than the brush, and I'm trying to keep them very organic. Next up, we're going to go with a brown, and in the original armor it butts up to a lot of the sand colors, but I never really saw it overlap. Now, for the black color, it does butt up to the sand and the brown, but there were instances that I saw it overlap the sand. The biggest problem is that every single armor created for the movie each had a different camo pattern to it, and none of them really matched each other. So if nothing else, just make up your own and go with what you think looks good. After these colors had all dried and I was pretty happy with the layout, it was now time to add paints that had more pigment. Now to get the sand color the correct hue, I'm going to have to do it in 2 separate layers. So I'm going to start with some raw sienna and unbleached titanium. I'm also going to add just a little bit of the yellow oxide and sap green. This is going to help the paint have a more vibrant base, because if I painted the final color on top of the green, it would just be too desaturated and dark. So I know it seems like a big extra step to have to paint everything and then paint it all again, but it's the only way I can get the color the exact shade that I want. The other problem being Terry English used out-of-the-pot enamels, so the colors were already exactly what he needed. And for the acrylics, I'm having to mix my own shades. For the brown sections, we're going to go with a raw umber and a little bit of unbleached titanium. You want it to look as though it's kind of a warm chocolate color. And to apply the paints, I'm using a small filbert brush and a decent amount of water because I want the paint to flow. The other thing is Terry did change the colors over time, so in some versions the stripes are black and other versions the stripes are dark green. I personally like the difference of the dark green versus the black, so I'm mixing together some cobalt green and Mars black to get my color. Now you could stay with the normal black, but I just felt it was too much of a contrast compared to the rest of the armor. This is also because I'm trying to base my camo pattern more off of Hicks and Hudson. So with my chocolate brown and dark green applied, I can now go back and fill in the sand. I wanted to wait till the end because this is the top color. And this is going to be a mixture of raw sienna and a little bit of sap green to help desaturate it. And here you can see how painted over that lighter base, it's exactly the color I was going for. Where had I not had the lighter base, it would have been too dark. Now I know this is a very time-consuming process, but go ahead and take the time. The camo itself is very important to the overall look, and if you rush this, it could make the whole armor set look off. For the lightning bolt highlights on the armor, I'm going to mix together some neutral gray 5 and titanium white. This pigment will be applied with a liner brush and a decent amount of water just so the paint flows properly. To make these details, I started off by just outlining a particular shape, and then I could go back to thicken up the line in certain areas to make it look more substantial. With this type of a camo pattern, there is no right or wrong answer, just do what looks good to you. Now a lot of makers that have the metal armor will use stove polish to darken it up and give it a more metallic feel. I didn't know how stove polish would look, so I decided to mix together some graphite powder and Mars black. The powder itself was added to the pigment and then thoroughly mixed together. Then this mixture could be heavily watered down and then brushed onto the surface. I would then use a damp paper towel to remove some of the excess paint. I've never added a graphite powder to a pigment before, but it turned out great. It was just enough variation to darken up the entire surface and give it a more worn feel. This also helps because in the movie, the original colors were very vibrant, so they darkened them down and then added a color grade to the entire movie. So all the colors that I've added to this are close to the original and before the color grade. And here's another special step. Because I added the graphite powder into the paint, I could then use a paper towel to buff the surface and kind of give it this slight metallic sheen. It's a very, very subtle process, but it does a great job in the end. Going back to the buckles, in the movie they were painted green and then paint was chipped away. To simulate this, I just used a coarse sanding sponge on some of the raised edges. Now I'm going to go in and add a little bit of battle damage with my rotary tool and some stone bits. This usually isn't how I would do it. I would do battle damage before I plasti dipped, but I wanted to cut down all the way through the layers of paint to the light gray foam underneath. And because this armor is supposed to be metal, the battle damage that I'm doing is very, very minimal, and it's purposefully along the edges, where the armor would get a lot more wear and tear. With the base foam exposed, I can now paint on top of it using some iridescent rich silver. The foam takes the paint just fine, and it's just enough of a metallic highlight to make it look as though the paint is scraped away. To simulate some more wear and tear, I'm going to use the side of a small detail brush along the edges. From a distance, this is going to look as though paint has been scraped away from the highest points. And under the lights, the metallic sheen stands out really well compared to the matte surface. Just like the battle damage, imagine what parts would have paint chipping. These are going to be a lot of the exposed areas, not the areas that are in the middle of the armor. The only exception to this, I tried to highlight the angles on the middle of the chest armor and all the raised rivets. With this said, I also envisioned that the shoulder pads and the back armor would get a lot more wear and tear. The Marines in the movie are constantly diving into or backing up to metal structures. Now normally I hand make a lot of my stuff, but I found these really good models online of the M40 grenades. And because I was trying to get this done in a hurry for a convention, I decided to go ahead and print them on my Elegoo Saturn III. This is a resin printer and it does a fantastic job capturing all the details from the 3D model. After the grenades have been glued together, I could then coat them with some Krylon premium sterling silver. The caps to the grenades would be covered in a flat red. The sterling silver is ridiculously reflective and does a great job on these 3D prints. This is the part that I was a little worried about, and it's creating the custom straps for the grenades. I start by using some 1-inch olive green cotton. These strips are cut to approximately 8 inches in length, and some self-adhesive Velcro is applied to the back. I'm then going to sew the top and the bottom of the Velcro to keep them in place. From here I'm going to sew another 1-inch strip on top. This is what the grenades are going to thread into. For mine I'm going to mark and sew a line approximately 1.5 inches from the top. I could then insert a grenade and mark exactly where the next line needs to be sewn. The process of marking where a grenade is going to be and sewing that line is repeated down the strip until I have 4 of them in place. The rest of the grenades can then be assembled and inserted. And all of these additional horizontal sewn lines go through the Velcro on the back as well, also helping secure it into place. The process could then be repeated for the grenades that will go on the opposite side. The main strap itself is going to be made out of 2-inch olive-colored cotton, and links to all of these will be down in the video description. The top of the strap has a detailed point, so I start by hot gluing it into place. I could then cut an additional 1-inch strip approximately 10 inches in length. This is going to mount to the back side of the 2-inch strip. This is going to be hot glued just to tack it into place. But then I'm going to draw out a triangle and sew that through both strips. And once I have the triangle complete on one, I then try to draw that out just to match it as close as I can. These 2-inch strips are approximately 17 inches long from the point to the bottom. Now it's time to attach the Velcro grenade strips to the 2-inch strips. The Velcro is going to be placed approximately 4 inches from the top. Now it's possible you may need to change this depending on how tall you are because the bottom of it will wrap into a belt. With the placement of the Velcro marked, I can now cut it to length and hot glue it to the 2-inch strip. I then was able to run it through the machine and sew the top and the bottom of the Velcro strip. Just like the buckles on the sides, the 1-inch buckles at the top were also painted green and distressed using a sanding sponge. Before attaching the top of the shoulders, I want to work on the shoulder caps. I'm going to start by cutting some 2-inch strips approximately 10 inches in length. Again, your size may vary depending on how wide your shoulders are. These strips are going to be hot glued and super glued to the back of the caps using my double adhesive method. The strip is then lined up with the rest of the cap and then marked for placement using a chalk pencil. The 2-inch strip could then be glued to the underside of the cap using hot glue and super glue. And here you can see just how the placement works. To match the movie, some 1-inch elastic is going to be glued to the back of the cap and to either side. Try to line them up with the fake rivets that we had added in the Part 1 video. This elastic does a good job of making sure that the cap doesn't wander too far out of placement. Now we can go back to the shoulder pads and we're going to attach 1/2 of the parachute clip to the underside. For this, you're going to use the black 1-inch nylon and glue this strip together using hot glue and super glue. The loop strip can be inserted into the shoulder pad and it's going to be glued here on the back side. After being marked and glued into place, this is going to give the nylon strip a really secure feel. To attach the back of the shoulder pads to the inside of the armor, we're going to use more of that 1-inch black nylon. These strips are going to be cut to approximately 12 inches in length, and each one is going to be cauterized. You're going to line them up with the fake rivets that we had glued to the top of the shoulder pad. These strips are going to be inserted into the inside of the armor. So I'm going to take my template from Part 1 and I'm going to trace and cut a small slit under this back detail. I could then use a small pick to insert the nylon strip into the foam. Before I find out exactly how far these shoulder pads need to come down, I need to figure out the placement of the belt. So I'm going to take my front strips and loop the bottom of it around to the back, making sure that I have clearance for the 2-inch strip belt. And after being tacked with hot glue, I could then sew this into place. And here's the final look for the front grenade holders. 2-inch cotton olive and a 2-inch buckle will make up the belt. Just like the other parachute buckles, this is painted green and then distressed. I could then start to mark exact placement of where the belt is going to be sewn together. The belt also has a 1-inch strip sewn on top, and this is for some of the Marines multi-tools. Again, low temp hot glue is just used to tack it, and then I can sew it permanently into place. The belt also has rivets at either end of this 1-inch strip for additional reinforcement. Now luckily I had a couple laying around that were of the correct length and I was able to hammer those into place. The rest of the belt can be fed through the other end of the parachute clip, and you can see how it all goes together. Now, if your sewing isn't perfect, don't worry about it. A lot of stuff made for military is made extremely fast and not necessarily perfect. Because I didn't have green thread, I'm now going to stain my white thread using some green paint. This olive color was just thinned down with some water, and I'm using a detail brush to paint it directly onto the threads. I also stained all the white threads that were on the grenade strips as well. So if your sewing isn't great, it's really hard to see anyway. With the straps and belt complete, I can now clip them to the shoulder pads and thread the belt through. The lower back plate can now be attached. More of that 1-inch black nylon is going to be cut and cauterized. These strips are then inserted and then glued to the back side of the lower back armor. The nylon can then be fed through the back and glued into place. The big thing to note here is that it has a decent amount of mobility, but it's able to hang freely. Now, one thing I'm doing different from the movie is I want the shoulders to be removable and adjustable. The original armor had these strips riveted into place. Instead of doing that, I'm going to be adding some parachute clips so they can be removed or adjusted if necessary. So this step is not a necessity, and if you just wanted to glue your strips to the inside, that's fine. Now, I travel with my armor all over the country, so I just figured this would make storing and shipping it a lot easier. Now, regardless if you do the parachute clips or not, I would recommend that you cut these 2mm pieces and glue them on top. This is going to help ensure that these nylon strips don't ever pull away from the foam. For the neck seal at the top, I'm going to be using some gray vinyl. This is going to be pretty similar to what they had used in the movie. For the front of the armor, it's approximately 10 inches in length and 2 inches in height. I glue the end of one side of it down just to give it kind of a pillowed bump at the bottom. The hot glue does not work well on this material, but again, it's just used to tack it while I run it through the sewing machine. So here you can see the pillowed edge on the bottom, and the top will wrap around to the inside. More hot glue is going to be used on the edge of the lip just to hold it in place for now. Once I'm satisfied with where it's at, I could then go in with some Bob Smith super glue and affix it permanently. This same process is going to be applied to the neck section on the back of the armor as well. The only difference is this strip is cut to 13 inches. And remember, you can always trim away the excess. And just like the front, the hot glue is just used to hold it into place. The super glue will be the final permanent fixture. The excess material can then be trimmed away with scissors, and the ends are super glued together. After you figure out exactly how far down the shoulder caps need to fit on your armor, then you can hot glue and super glue the 2-inch cotton strips to these sections. But this length could be different person to person depending on how wide your shoulders are. The underside of these strips are also glued into place, and then the push pins can all be removed. So you all can see the steps that I took to put together my own custom Colonial Marine chest armor, and I'm really excited with how this entire thing turned out. Now, be sure to swing back by because I will be adding future builds to this armor set. I just need a little break before that happens, but I will have it done by DragonCon because I told several of my friends that I'd have it down there on display. So if you are building any of my builds or utilizing some HD foam, be sure to tag me at SKSProps on Twitter and Instagram because I want to see your creations. Until next time, build your best with the best. HD foam.